welcome to the tutorial video for the Valken V12 HPA airsoft engine. We're just going to go over some of the tools recommended for the installation of the V12. First we're going to start off with a standard Phillips head screwdriver. This is for attaching the motor grip. Next we have a longer Phillips screwdriver. This is so that you can easily install the buffer tube screw in the buffer tube assembly. Here we have a smaller Phillips, like a jeweler's screwdriver. This is for installing your mag release. If you have a mag release that requires a small Allen, 1mm, 1.5mm, or if it installs similar to a real AR, then you don't need a tool at all, obviously. Next we have an O-ring pick. This helps with installing the upgraded nub in the hop-up unit. Not required, but helps. Sometimes a punch for the body pins for when you're disassembling and installing. Sometimes it helps. Here we have 100% pure silicone grease. This helps when installing the upgraded nub into the hop-up unit. We'll go into that one later. Also a number 11 O-ring. This is for the hop-up assembly as well. We'll go over that when we get to the nub installation. And for a power supply for the V12, we recommend a 7.4 volt 250 milliamp LiPo battery with a E-Flite connector. This is the stock connector that is on the V12. Now what we're going to start with is an AEG lower. This has already had the gearbox, motor, wiring harness, everything already removed and ready for the installation. And we'll just start our install from here. The V12 in its factory configuration has the battery harness wired to the rear, so you'll just route that into the rear, and your air inlet goes in through the grip. And the V12 should just drop in. You shouldn't have to force it. Everything should line up. You'll see the holes will line up, and at this point you can install the rear body pin. Next we'll have the motor grip. You'll feed the air inlet through the center of the motor grip, and you'll use your Phillips head screwdriver. Sometimes it helps if you have a flashlight so that you can see down inside the motor grip, so you can line up the screws properly. When you tighten down the motor grip screws, you just want to tighten, hand tight. Don't over tighten them. You can run the risk of stripping the screws or snapping them off inside the engine, which is never good. So just hand tight. With an AEG, typically you have a Flora pin, which installs in the small center hole here. It's not necessary for a V12 engine, as everything is lined up so that it just needs to be held in place with the grip and the rear body pin. Also, the LED for the programming is visible through this small hole. You can install this if you want. Not necessary, because you can still see the LED splash on the trigger here inside the trigger well. At this point I like to check the fire control unit and ensure that everything is functioning properly and that everything lines up. So you'll plug in your LiPo. Now when you move the selector to safe, you should see the LED blink red once. This indicates that it is out of safe mode and has entered the fire mode. You should hear the solenoid click with each trigger pull. You can then move it to the auto position and hold the trigger down, and then you'll be able to hear the solenoid activate rapidly. And also make sure that while it's in the safe position, that the solenoids do not activate and that it is not in fire mode. Okay, we can move on from this point. You can reinstall your buffer plate, or if you have a sling plate, and your buffer tube. Thread the wire harness through the buffer tube. And this is where you'll use your longer Phillips screwdriver. Another tricky point to where you'll maybe want a flashlight to line up your screwdriver with the buffer tube screw. Also, just hand tight, snug it down. No need to over tighten it. You can also reinstall your mag release. And since we're installing this on a combat machine, we'll need a small jeweler's Phillips screwdriver. Now we can install the QD slip fitting, which just slips on to the macro line with just a little bit of pressure, and it's a shark bite fitting, so once it's installed it doesn't pull off. It's secured with air pressure and small shark bite fittings. Now we can move on to the upper. You can reinstall your upper receiver. Okay, now that we have the AEG body assembled with the V12, we can move on to testing it with an air source. So we'll need to reconnect the LiPo. And for our air source, we'll be using a Valken 6845 HPA tank with a Ninja SLP V2 Pro regulator. The SLP helps with airflow and shot consistency when you're running low pressure into your second stage regulator. For our second stage regulator, we're going to be using an Amped Airsoft Build-A-Rig. So you can now connect your air source to the QD inlet. Ensure that you have a good seal and that none of the fittings are leaking. Then we can set our selector to semi. Function. Now you can take this out to the range and finish dialing in your hop-up, and that will complete your installation tutorial of the V12 HPA Airsoft engine.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and follow us on social media, and you'll get the exclusives from Valken Sports.